Just 2 weeks ago, a tanker truck tipped over and caught fire under the exit ramp of I-95 in Philly, causing a massive fire, collapsed the roadway, of course, killing the driver. And this horrible news is not just tragic for the families involved, but the chaos that came from it from the trucking and logistics industries. Until the road is fixed, which was anticipated to take many months potentially, and ironically, the road's open in 12 days now. You mentioned in a Transport Topics article that an estimated 14,000 trucks cross that section of road daily, and the Port of Philadelphia is nearby. There's 7 million tons of cargo annually going in and out of there. When you heard of the news of the collapsed interstate, what was your immediate sort of reaction with like how the PMTA could be involved?
Well, it's funny. I mentioned the truck driving championships. We had our truck driving championships dinner the night before this happened. So we had about 930 people in a room and, highlight of the year, truck driving, and our drivers were just, the focus that weekend. And we woke up Sunday morning to that. And it was just tragic and just awful. And that, that said, like you said, 12 days later, the interstate was open. But from PMTA standpoint, our first thought, and the first thought I had when I found out the news is just get the information out. Right. Because as we all know, the trucking industry, is resilient. And if you give them the information that they need to make good decisions, they can make decisions. So our first thought was to get as much information as we could out to our members and to the public at large and the industry. So we quick sent an email out. We started posting information on our website, and we just put as much information as possible out so that the industry and truckers going through and into the area would have as much information as possible. So of course we shared PennDOT's official detour information. We shared the PA 511 website as well as PennDOT's information, and just tried to share as much information as possible right away.
I know the news was also changing rapidly. Of course, I was following it on social media, and you got the people that like to overblow situations of like, what is it hauling? How did the bridge actually collapse? It couldn't just be a normal fire. All this drama that went around it, which is always crazy because then you're like, you can't correct everybody from something like that.
And you just want to deal with the situation. Look, we have a real situation here. Let's focus on managing it. So that's what we had to do.
You mentioned, of course, that the official detour was US 1 and that could greatly impact traffic and congestion, obviously. But what's less known is that is a big concern for safety for our drivers because disrupting routes, congestion, it leads to crashes. Pushing commercial vehicles to roads not designed to trucks creates its own problems. When PMTA asked the state to consider some of these issues, what or how are these decisions made, and how quickly can things change with your advice?
Well, it's interesting. We were talking to PennDOT right away Sunday morning, and we were putting out the official detour information. But our initial thought, too, was that we're talking about sort of two categories of truck here. We're talking about the through truckers that are literally just going, through the area on 95. We need to get them out of the area because that detour on US 1, pushing 14,000 trucks, like you said, onto US 1 wasn't going to go well. So our focus was to try to get as much information to the through truckers as we could to show them alternatives so that they could avoid the entire region altogether because of the congestion that was going to result. So the bigger problem actually was the trucks who were delivering and picking up those local businesses right in that region. Right. And a lot of them were located right near the bridge and right along Route 1 there, which, like, as you said, is not designed for trucks. So we knew we were going to see a lot of problems, and we did hear some businesses that weren't getting deliveries. We know there were some members that just had to stop delivering or picking up in those areas just because of the congestion in the area. So we knew that was the biggest concern, and we did talk to PennDOT about that. And I think their response was to just, again, put out as much information as possible. So they did revamp their local detours a little bit. Right. They adjusted their signage and just And I think the other thing that's worth mentioning is now we have, we all have GPS, systems. We can all go online and look at the traffic. They even, I had so much fun sitting in my office, well, if you can call it fun, in Harrisburg, and right across the river from Harrisburg, looking at cameras on the roads in Philadelphia, which, you could see, what the congestion was like on the Schuylkill Expressway, for example, which was part of the detour. And you could see how traffic was adapting to the closure. And that was really interesting. And I do think PennDOT adapted itself to some of those natural detours that some of these companies and some of the drivers were taking. So it was interesting to watch. From our perspective at PMTA, we were trying to make folks aware of the impact on those local trucks that were trying to get in and out of those businesses, because that region of Philadelphia was high manufacturing, food suppliers, small businesses that needed to get pickups and deliveries there. So not to mention the port, like you said.
Well, yeah, you mentioned the food suppliers. I mean, the port too, like I think you mentioned in the article that over 54% of the stuff going through the port is refrigerated goods. It's produce, which
lots of reefer trucks.
Right. And they might be going up through to New York or wherever. And I know during our time during this, we're like, hey, you might want to consider going through the New Jersey Turnpike. Turnpikes are no fun for everybody, extra costs. But you mentioned that you had to work with the New Jersey Motor Truck Association as well. How's that partnership look? What was those discussions like?
It's kind of interesting to think that this specific section of Interstate 95, there are a lot of routes around it, luckily.
Right.
So a lot of the through traffic already was taking 295 over to the Jersey Turnpike. So we talked about that, and we're aware that that was the way a lot of traffic was going to divert. So it was kind of keeping an eye on that and what the impacts would be. And so it was more along those lines because we were aware that that was a route that a lot of the through trucks were already taking. So it was just going to increase the congestion likely on those routes. Now, talking to our members, a lot of them also routed around the region by going to Pennsylvania Turnpike. So we know that was also the case. And even some even farther out to the west, 83, 81, 78. And it's like I said, truckers are resilient. They're going to find a way. Just give them all the information they need. Now, one thing that was interesting is I drove around a lot. I didn't go to Philadelphia. I haven't been there yet, but drove around some of the other interstates, and I noticed a lot more truck traffic, at the rest areas and things like that. So I do think that there was a lot of diversion of the through trucks onto the surrounding interstates, which isn't a bad thing. And it was a temporary situation, and I think everyone made the best of it. So
I mean, yeah, for it taking less than 2 weeks for at least continued traffic, I think it's one lane right now getting through, but still it's better than nothing. And
it's 3 lanes.
Oh, 3 lanes.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And I know, of course, because when this stuff kind of happens, it's like, okay, well, what about truck parking? Because Philly is a big area. And then if it's going to be less diverted through Philly, whose truck parking is an issue anyway.
Well, and that's one of the things we were trying to communicate during this period is, look, if trucks are getting off the highway and they're getting into some of these back streets in Philadelphia, which they were, some very small back streets in Philadelphia, sometimes they're going to need to pull over and stop. So be patient, be understanding that this is a situation that we have to deal with. It's not the trucker's fault. It's nobody's fault. It's just something that's we're just gonna have to deal with for a little bit. So we were trying to get the word out about that as well.
And I thought it was interesting. You mentioned the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and I know during the time, I mean, obviously it's more tolls, more cost associated with, for these trucking companies to have to deal with. In fact, I think, I forget who, a recent article, Landline or somebody said that the cost of operation for a trucking company was the highest it's ever been, $2 a mile. And PMTA was looking into a toll fee waiver in those coming days and weeks. With it open, did that go anywhere? Is it still being something pursued?
No, that, like we said, the interstate was opened so quickly at 60% capacity that it wasn't something that we actually had time to move, because in this case, because the Turnpike Authority to toll is actually a legislative authority. It comes from the General Assembly. So we would have had to get a bill passed in the state legislature, and that takes a little bit of time. So that we didn't end up having to go that route in this case, but we we did start asking the questions as to whether that would be possible.
And then obviously they're still working on the bridge. It's going to take obviously months, but I mean, that's part of the process. Get the roads open and then finish it up at a decent pace. And I think yesterday, the House passed a resolution to try to keep funding for, this construction and this effort being funded. Is PMTA a part of continued process with this, or what's the future for PMTA and the I-95 stuff?
Well, we're just going to continue to be supportive of getting the interstate, back up to 100% capacity and getting it fixed. There was a disaster declaration that was required in order to get the funding, the federal funding to get it fixed, and we obviously supported that, and we're continuing to be supportive of getting the interstate back to 100%.
Very cool.